by the way, we will be having conditional statements. Now, to start with, how do you define conditional statements? Conditional statements are simply if-then statements. So if you see like a statement starting with an if, then followed by a statement, then another phrase, then that's what you call a conditional statements. Okay? Those are conditional statements. Now let's have an example. If a number is divisible by 2 and 3, then it is divisible by 6. This is an example of an if-then statement. Then take note, a conditional statement has two parts. This is the hypothesis, the if part. So take note, this is the if part, the hypothesis. Then the then part is what you call the conclusion. So take note of the two parts of a conditional statement. This is the if part. This is the then part. Okay, let's continue. So the if part here, a number is divisible by 2 and 3. The then part, which is the conclusion, it is divisible by 6. Okay, let's determine the hypothesis and the conclusion. What is the hypothesis in this sentence?
If a polygon has 4 sides.
Okay, a polygon has 4 sides is the hypothesis. What about the conclusion? What is the conclusion here?
Then it is
Quadrilateral.
Okay. Hypothesis. Then it is a quadrilateral. That is your conclusion. What about this example? If a number is greater than 2, if a number greater than 2 is even, then it is not prime.
Hypothesis
Okay, a number greater than 2 is even. That's your hypothesis.
Yes.
Then the conclusion is
It is not prime.
it isn't prime. It isn't prime. Okay, let's have this one. State the hypothesis and the conclusion for each statement. For this example, what is the hypothesis? Two angles are supplementary. That's your hypothesis. Let's underline it once. What about the conclusion?
The sum of their angle is 180 degrees.
The sum of two angles of their angles is 180 degrees. That's your hypothesis. Let's have our second example. What is the hypothesis here?
if you are
5
5 feet
feet
tall.
Okay, you are 5 feet tall. That's your hypothesis. And the conclusion is
You're also
60
inches tall.
that's you are. That's missing. Then you are. So we need to have you are here. This is you are also 60 inches tall. That is your conclusion. Now, what if the statement is stated this manner? What is the hypothesis here?
A friend.
He is a friend if he stays within good and
Okay,
bad
so
times.
take note, you look for the word if. Because after the word if, that is your hypothesis. So the word if here is stated, it's found over here. So the hypothesis is he stays in good and bad times. He stays with you. That's with you again. He stays with you in good and bad times. That is the hypothesis. And what's the conclusion?
A friend is
A friend is real is the conclusion. Okay. That's your conclusion. So take note, that does not mean na always you are gonna start with the hypothesis all the time. There are instances that your sentence starts with the conclusion followed by the hypothesis. Just analyze the sentence, okay? Let's have another one. Okay, what about this one? If two angles are adjacent, then they have a common vertex. What's your hypothesis here?
If two angles
Are adjacent.
Okay, two angles are adjacent is the hypothesis. And the conclusion is
then they have common
they have a common vertex. What about this sentence here? What if your sentence is not stated in if-then form? Just like you are just given a declarative sentence.
If an angle has equal measures, then it is a congruent angle, sir.
Now, your knowledge in grammar is very, very important. Now, you will be determining what the subject is and the predicate is. Now, what is the subject in this sentence?
congruent.
Congruent angles. So, the subject is simply the hypothesis. So, meaning, congruent angles will be the hypothesis. So take note, the subject, this is the subject, and that's your hypothesis. What about the predicate here? What's the predicate?
Equal measures.
Have equal.
Have
So
equal
take note, a predicate starts with the verb all the time. So have equal measures, that's your predicate. And that will serve as your conclusion. So this is our conclusion. Let's have our next example. What is the hypothesis here?
A triangle.
A triangle, because a triangle is the subject. What about the conclusion?
Has three sides.
Has three sides, because has three sides is the predicate. Therefore, it is your conclusion. So take note, if your sentence is in declarative form, the subject is the hypothesis, the predicate is the conclusion. Okay, let's have more exercises. Number 1, what is the hypothesis here?
If two lines intersect each other at 90 degrees,
Okay, two lines intersect each other at 90 degrees. And what is the conclusion?
Then
then they are perpendicular.
They are perpendicular. Okay, what about statement number 2? What is the hypothesis?
If two angles form a linear pair,
Okay, two angles form a linear pair. What about the conclusion here?
then they are
They are supplementary. Number 3, what is the hypothesis here?
the intersection of two parallel lines.
Okay, the intersection of two parallel lines. That's the subject. Therefore, that is the hypothesis. What about the conclusion? Is an empty set. What about number 4? What is the hypothesis?
Align.
A line. What is the conclusion?
Contains at least 2 points.
Contains at least 2 points. Number 5, what is the hypothesis here?
Students in high school.
Students in high school. And what is your conclusion?
Study mathematics.
Study mathematics. Number 6, what is the hypothesis?
A diameter.
A diameter. And what's your conclusion?
Is a board that passes through the center of the
Okay, is a chord that passes through the center of the circle. Let's have our last item, number 7. What is your hypothesis?
No triangle.
No triangle. And what's your conclusion?
Has two right angles.
Has 2 right angles. So take note, it's very important that you should know what the hypothesis is and the conclusion is. Now let's have this one. Let's write the following in if-then form. Your hypothesis is this. 2 lines are perpendicular. This is now your conclusion. Then the 2 lines intersect. Who would like to give me the conditional statement here?
Logo, sir.
Yes, go on.
If 2 lines are perpendicular, then the two lines intersect.
Okay, if two lines are perpendicular, then the two lines intersect. Now, let's make use of pronouns there. Instead, we will be using the pronoun after the then in the conclusion. So we will be stating it this manner. If two lines are perpendicular, then they intersect. It's okay also not to use pronouns. I'm going to accept that. No problem with that. As long as the thought is there, that's totally correct. Okay, let's have another one. The hypothesis: a student studies his lessons religiously. The conclusion: the student will surely pass all his subjects. What's your conditional here?
If a student studies his lessons religiously, then the student will surely pass all his subjects.
Okay. If a student studies his lessons religiously, then he will surely pass all his subjects. Okay? Let's have another one. Two angles have equal measures. Conclusion: the two angles are congruent.
If two
If
angles
two angles
Two
have
angles
equal
have
measures,
equal measures, then they are congruent.
Okay,
But
if
they are-
two angles have equal measures, then they are congruent. That's totally right. What about this one? James follows rules and regulations. James is seldom caught in trouble.
If James follows
James
rules,
follows regulations,
he is
then
seldom
James
caught
is
Correct.
caught
If
in trouble.
James follows rules and regulations, then he is seldom caught in trouble. Last one. The sum of two angles is 180. The two angles are supplementary.
if
if the sum
Two
of two
angles
angles is
is
180, then the
then
two
they
angles
are
are
supplementary.
Okay. If the sum of two angles is 180, then they are supplementary. That's totally right.
What
Yes.
if say ka nang ini ka exam si ka nang dili na mo mabutang ang day ka nang mga day of years kay na.
It's
Amo lang
totally
ikaw,
right.
please,
It's
lovely
totally.
ako,
You'll be
please,
using only the noun itself. It's totally correct. I'm not gonna mark that wrong if you'll not be using pronouns there. Okay? Next. This time, what if you're given a declarative sentence? How do you rewrite that in if-then form, meaning in conditional? How do you write the conditional statement there? Now, first thing to do is you need to determine the hypothesis and the conclusion. Now, what's our hypothesis here, by the way?
congruent
Congruent
angles.
Okay, let's take note of that. This is our hypothesis. This is our hypothesis. And what's your conclusion?
Have equal
Have equal
measures.
measures.
Okay. So take note, since our hypothesis is congruent angles, this is the if part. You will be having congruent angles in the if part. Have equal measures will be in the then part. So how are you going to construct your sentence now?
if congruent angles.
Sige, if, what? If, now what is the main subject in your,
Congruent angles.
when I say main subject, that's only one word. That's only one word. What's the main subject here?
Angle.
Angle. So
Angle.
meaning, I'm gonna start with,
If
if,
angles have equal measures,
no,
then
no,
we have
no. If angles are congruent. So take note, the word congruent and angle should be found in the hypothesis because that's your hypothesis, man. Congruent angle. So I'm gonna rephrase that. If angles are congruent, then
It is an equal sign.
they have equal measures.
they. Take note, angles is plural. I'm gonna be using they. They have
An equal sign.
equal measures. So just use the pronoun they and just rewrite have equal measures. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's have more examples. An acute angle measures less than 90 degrees. What's your hypothesis here?
If an acute angle measures
Hypothesis?
If an angle is acute, then it
Okay,
measures
wait,
less
hot.
than 90
Let's
degrees.
determine first the
Then it measures
hypothesis.
less than
And this
90 degrees.
is your conclusion. So meaning, mauni siya ang if part, this will be the then part. So this is if an angle is acute, okay, then singular maning angle, you will be using a singular pronoun. What are you going to use here? It. It measures less than 90 degrees. That's your answer. Sorry. That's your answer. If an angle is acute, then it measures less than 90 degrees. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Let's have another example. An angle whose measure is 90 degrees is a right angle. The hypothesis is an angle whose measure is 90 degrees. The hypothesis, the conclusion is a right angle. So this is the if part. This is the then part. What's your conditional statement now?
If an angle
If
whose
an
measure is 90
measures-
degrees,
Oh,
then it
is
is the
that
right
it
angle.
is
If
right
an angle, kining whose, omit that. If an angle
Measures 90.
measures, okay. If an angle measures 90 degrees, then what?
It is a right angle.
It is a right angle. Okay? So take note, this is our conditional statement. If an angle measures 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. Next one. What about this? Supplementary angles have measures whose sum is 180. Now, this is your hypothesis. This is your conclusion. So this is the if part. This is the then part. What is your conditional statement here?
If angles are supplementary, then they
Okay.
have measures whose sum is 180 degrees.
If angles are supplementary, then they what?
Have measures whose sum is 180 degrees.
You can rephrase it. You can rephrase it. You can rephrase it.
Then they have sum of 180
Then,
degrees.
pwede rin na, then
The sum is 180
okay, the sum of their measures. The sum of their measures is 180 degrees. But I can also accept they have measures whose sum is 180. It's still okay. Okay? As long as the thought is there, that's totally correct. Are there any questions so far, Section Ruby?
None, sir.
Okay, let's have another example. A triangle has 3 sides. Now, this time, you have noticed that in our previous examples, in our previous examples, we have an adjective. What kind of angle? Sir, supplementary. What kind of angle? Sir, acute. What kind of angle? Sir, congruent. There is an adjective in our sentence, in our subject. What if your subject contains only one word. Like for example, a triangle. There is no descriptor, there is no adjective that describes a triangle. Because take note that a triangle here is the subject and has three sides is the predicate, that this is the if part, this is the then part. Now, how are you going to state your conditional statement now? You introduce a new word. What is a general word for a triangle? What's a triangle, by the way? What's a general word for that? Just one word. A word. If what? If?
A shape.
Okay, pwede. If a shape
Has three sides.
is, no. Dapat,
Is a triangle.
triangle, makitaan sa if part. Ayaw sulti if a triangle has three sides. Because has three sides should be found in the then part. I should see triangle in the if part. So therefore, if a shape is a triangle, then
It has three
it
sides.
has three
Three
sides. So take note, this is the if part. I should see triangle in the if part. This is the then part, so I should see this in the then part. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's have more examples. What about this one? Who would like, what is the if-then form for this, or the conditional statement for this? The subject is?
Points
that
lie
lie
on
on
the
the
same
same
line.
line.
Okay, what's your predicate? This one. So I should see this if part. This is in the then part. What is your if-then statement now? If?
If points lie on the same
And
line.
it's- Same
Okay,
line,
if
then it
points
is a collinear.
lie on the same line,
Then
they are collinear points. That is your conditional statement now. Okay, let's have another one. An equiangular triangle is also equilateral. This is the hypothesis. This is the conclusion. So what is the if-then form for this sentence?
if a triangle is an equiangular.
Okay, if a triangle is equiangular, please do not use an article before an adjective. If is equiangular. If a triangle is equiangular, then
Is also
it
is also
is also equilateral. Okay? Let's have another example. Number 3. An isosceles triangle has at least 2 congruent sides. What is your hypothesis?
If I,
if a triangle is an isosceles.
Okay. Sige. If a triangle is do not use an article and or a is isosceles lang na, because isosceles here is an adjective. If you'll be using an adjective, you will not be using articles there. But if you're gonna have like, if a triangle is an isosceles triangle, that's totally right. But if you're gonna use isosceles alone, if a triangle is isosceles, because you don't, like, example, if your classmate is smart, you don't tell your classmate, you are a smart. You right away, you are smart. You get my point? When you use adjectives directly, you don't use articles an or a. You state it right away. You are smart. You are pretty. You are handsome. You don't state your sentence like, you are a pretty. You are a handsome. That's totally wrong. But if you're going to have like, you are a handsome boy. You are a handsome girl. There is now a noun a noun before or after rather the adjective, then you'll be using articles there. Okay? Next. Then
it
It has
They have at least
it has at least
two congruent
two congruent
sides.
sides. Okay. Next. Number 4. The midpoint of a segment bisects the segment. So take note, this is now our hypothesis. This should be our conclusion. So focus ta sa hypothesis na to. How do you state your if part? What is a midpoint? A midpoint is, what's a general word for a midpoint? It's a point. So meaning, I'm going to have if a point is a midpoint
Midpoint of
of a
a
segment. So this time, introduce a word, a general word of a midpoint because wala naman tay adjective din ha. So take note, a midpoint is a point. So therefore, if a point is a midpoint of a sentence, of a segment rather, then
it bisects the segment.
it bisects the segment. That's totally correct. Is this clear, section Ruby?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's have our last example. The intersection of two lines is a point. The intersection of two lines is the if part. This is the then part. What is your if part now? If what?
If the two lines
if two lines intersect.
Okay, correct. If, pwede ra, if the two lines, or if two lines intersect. That's totally right. Intersect. What is the then part here? Then?
the
They have a point.
point.
Align masad kay mo ko, they have a point. You state it with sense. Dapat na ay sense, na ay idea, na ay gist ato ang sentence. If two lines intersect, then
It has, sir.
what is that it?
It makes a point.
It makes a point. Rephrase pa. Look for another phrase for the then.
And they have a point.
You use intersection. You use the word intersection. Then
The intersection
their
has a point.
Intersection is point.
Okay, their intersection is a point.
Yes.
That is now the correct statement.